Abstraction's how I live my day to day. Sketchy lines upon an empty page. Hard to explain and to express. Forever just a work in progress. Feeling happy, feeling sad. Drawing good and drawing bad. Can't hold a pencil or a thought. Can't paint myself something I'm not. Feeling every day the same. Up and down on every frame.
So, all right. It's good to see from the responses, and I'm glad that you had fun from the activity. Now, I hope everyone get to know each other a little bit more and had the opportunity to connect with new people. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker for today. Our first speaker is the current internals VP of EA2. She is currently taking BS Psychology in Ateneo de Manila University and will be the one who will lead the talk about Introduction to EA and Effective Mindset. Once again, may we welcome Ricaela Gabriel.
So, thank you so much, Beto, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. So, I'm Rika Gabrielle. And a little background about me, I started learning about EA last 2019. And I can honestly say that engaging with EA resources has given me more direction in life and a lot more hope in humanity because it's great to see familiar and unfamiliar faces in the crowd that just want to do more good. And are interested in learning more about the movement. And I'm so grateful for this chance to learn with you today. So, for this first session, we are going to be focusing on the definition of EA and the effectiveness mindset. So, what is effective altruism? Effective altruism, or EA, is a social movement and global community of people who try to use evidence and reason to figure out how to help others as much as possible, and then take action on that basis. So it focuses both on thinking and doing. EA's aims are welfarist, impartial, and maximizing. And basically, what that means is EA, as a movement, aims to increase the welfare of individuals as much as possible, enabling a lot of people to live happier, healthier, and more fulfilling lives, while giving equal weight to everyone's interests, regardless of their race, gender, where and when they live, and species. Which is why, as a movement, EA also considers the lives of animals and not just humans, and also future people who have yet to exist, and not just those who live today, when it comes to doing good. And last is EA aims to do the most good. It is maximizing. So members of this community want to maximize the use of their time, careers, and money to create the most positive social impact. And now that we have defined EA, I also want to explicitly share what EA is not. So EA is not a normative claim, which means no one person can rigidly define what EA is, because it is not meant to provide a set of answers, but it is more of a process. And I think it's helpful to think of EA as a scientific approach to doing good. So just like science, it can help you find answers, but over some time, these answers are subject to change, rebuttals, or advancement. And that's the beauty of it. So EA is an ever growing movement. Now, I guess you're all like assessing whether or not EA is something you resonate with. Well, I'll help you with that. So I'll introduce to you guys four underlying assumptions that if you agree with them, then you might already be on board with EA. And I'd like this to be a bit more participatory. So if you guys agree with the statement flashed on the screen, just give me a thumbs up. Okay, let's test that out. Can you give me a thumbs up now? Okay, great, great, great. So first is that it is important to help others. So Yes, thumbs up, thumbs up. Great, great. So I think most of us, if not all, would agree that we should help people in need if we can and when we can. And the next statement is everyone should be valued equally. So do you guys agree with this? Okay, great, great, great. Yay. So yeah, I'm glad you agree that we shouldn't discriminate and prefer some groups over others when we're doing good. And then the third statement is helping more is better than helping less, right? Yeah. So if we were given the opportunity, we would choose to help more, right? And the last is our resources are limited. And I think okay, I see lots of thumbs up. Yeah, we don't have infinite time, money, and other resources. And I'm glad that most of you guys agree with these underlying assumptions, and they are pretty intuitive and almost obvious. But when you put them together, they actually have significant implications for how we think about doing good, especially the fourth point. Because there are so many causes in the world, but our time and money are finite resources. We then need to place more effort in evaluating which interventions and causes to invest in, and not just participate in the causes that our friends are interested in or the causes that we're currently aware of. So we have to expand beyond that. And I guess a way to do this is to start considering the opportunity costs of our decisions when it comes to doing good. So, opportunity cost is actually a common term used in economics. And if you guys are familiar with this, give me a thumbs up. I think most are because we're university students, right? Okay. So, basically it pertains to the potential benefits you miss out on for making a specific choice. So when it comes to doing good, some of these trade-offs can be as big as missing out on saving 100 more people than you could have if you invested in another intervention or cause. So we'll be diving deeper into that later, but for now I want us to play a little game. So we're going to play the social program quiz. So I will be showing you four programs that have been implemented by various governments and organizations. And for each one, you're going to guess whether the program had a positive effect, meaning it made things better, a negative effect, as in it actually worsened the situation, or it had no effect at all. And I'd like you to send the letter that corresponds to your answer in the Zoom chat. And I will be looking at the Zoom chat to see. There. Thank you, Pia, for typing that down there too. Okay, so the first program is the electronic baby simulators. So, this program provides electronic dolls to teenage schoolgirls for one weekend with the aim to reduce teen pregnancy and convince girls to use contraception. So, the dolls are programmed to simulate the burden of caring for a real child. Now, the question is, did it have a positive effect, meaning it decreased pregnancy rate, or a negative effect, meaning, oh wow, lots of answers. It increased pregnancy rate or no effect. So a lot of people are saying C. Wow, lots of C's, some A's, a few B's. And well, thanks for participating. The right answer is B. So it actually had a negative effect. So it increased the risk of pregnancy to those who participated in the program compared to the girls that didn't take part in the program. And the exact reasons for this is unknown, but it is hypothesized that it's because they enjoyed the attention that they were receiving when they had the doll, and also that it provided them the confidence to what is to care for a child because of this experience. So yeah, and then let's go to the next one. So the next program is DARE, which stands for Drug Abuse Resistance Education. So it is a drug education program where students are taught about the effects of drug use and how to make good decisions and not succumb to peer pressure. So the question now is, do you think DARE had a positive effect, as in it increased oh no, it decreased the rate of drug use, or a negative effect, as in it increased the rate of drug use, or no measured effect? So I see an A here. And what are those? Okay, there. Okay, a lot of C's, B's. Okay, varied answers. Varied answers. Wow. Okay, so let's see who's right. And the answer is C. So it actually had no impact on students' drug use. So arguably, this program did exhaust time and resources that could have been spent on more effective programs. So that is a harm on its own, I think, because police officers had to provide 10 to 20 hours of their time for this program, and students invested time as well that they could have spent doing something else. So not to mention the monetary costs, but yeah, so it's a lot of spending for something that didn't have an effect. So now let's go into the third one, which is the restorative justice conferencing. It is another crime prevention strategy. So the aim of this program was to reduce reoffending by having offenders attend meetings with the victims of their crime, along with a trained moderator who facilitates a discussion. So they discuss here the harm that was done and come up with ways that the offender can put things right. So this was done in addition to regular courtroom proceedings. So what do you guys think? Did it have a positive effect, meaning it decreased the rate of reoffending, a negative effect, or no effect? Okay, A's, mostly A's. I see. Okay, how about the rest? Okay, cool, cool. A lot of A's for this one. And you guys are right. Those who chose A are right. So it actually had a positive effect. And it has been shown to be very useful. A study done in the UK showed that for every £1 spent on this program, which is around 67 pesos, 14 pounds was saved on the cost to society. So that's a lot of money saved. And last is a program called Scared Straight. So here they take delinquent kids or those kids with a high risk of committing crimes and then take them to prison for a visit. And the goal here is the same. So to frighten these kids about the life in prison so they'll make better choices. So this program reduced the rate of offending for these kids, as in does it have a positive effect or a negative effect? Meaning it increased the crime rates or no effect. Okay, that's a lot of B's. B's, B's, B's. C's, I see a C. All right. How about the rest? Okay. Okay, interesting. A lot of B's for this one. And let's see if you guys are right. And you are. So those doing the study found that for every $1 spent on the program, the cost to society due to extra crime was $200. So that's a lot of money. Imagine spending 50 pesos to help, but then you end up costing society like 10,000 pesos. And that's a lot. And that's the end of the social programs quiz. Hopefully, it illustrated how, despite people's good intentions, our ideas about helping others doesn't always translate into real help. Oh, I'm glad you guys had fun. I'm glad Elmer had fun. Okay, and that's not all. Some interventions are much better at doing good than others. In other words, they're cost effective. And the exciting thing is that the best options for improving lives are sometimes hundreds of times better than the average. And that might mean the difference between helping one person and helping hundreds of people for the exact same amount of time or money. And let's look at one example. So here we have 5 interventions for treating HIV and AIDS. And of these 5, which do you think is the most cost effective or the one with the highest impact to cost ratio? Basically, where you get the most bang for your buck. So I want you to type in the chat your guess for this question. D. E. D or E? Oh, okay. There's an A, there's an E. Lots of E's so far. Oh, A's, A's. Okay. How about the rest? I want to see the other people's guesses. Okay. Okay, so most of you guys chose E, and the majority is right. So, as you can see in this graph, education for high risk groups proves to be incredibly cost effective, with a high number of DALIs averted per $1,000. And I guess not everyone knows what DALIs stands for. Well, it stands for Disability Adjusted Life Year, and it is a metric commonly used for measuring the burden of diseases. So you can think of one DALI as 1 year of healthy life lost due to disability or premature death. So let's go back to the example. So I don't want you guys to focus too much on the numbers, but I want you to look at the difference in cost effectiveness. So education for high risk groups, which is the fifth one, is 1,400 times more cost effective than the surgical treatment for Kaposi's sarcoma, which is so big. And then this treatment A does less than 0.1% as much good per dollar as the most effective. So, what does this mean? So think about what this means when it comes to choosing which interventions to support and the opportunity costs of these choices. So if we choose to fund methods of helping people that aren't as good as the best one, this can mean hundreds, thousands, or millions of additional deaths, depending on how much funding we're talking about. So maximizing cost effectiveness with limited resources is one way to save many lives. So, based on our discussion so far, what do we know? Well, we know that not all problems are the same and not all interventions are the same. And the expected impact of certain problems could be significantly more than others. And sometimes we may try really hard to base our decisions on evidence, but we could still be wrong about some things. And that's why it's good to take seriously the next following concepts I'll be talking about, and these will all fall under uncertainty. The first concept is epistemic modesty, which is the admission that there's a lot that we don't know. So we have to adopt an attitude of humility when it comes to doing good. We should be willing to adjust our beliefs sometimes based on new information or the opinion of true experts because they do spend more time in their fields. And while other people's ideas can be wrong too, and some methodologies can be faulty, the important point here is to keep questioning and also be humble about what we know and what we don't know. And there's a lot we don't know, most especially those things we can't readily experience or observe. And there's also a lot that we're not sure of normatively. So, like some questions about morality that just don't have one answer. So, an example of this question would be like, do some beings matter more than others? Like, there's no one answer for that. And another example would be, is it acceptable to judge an action based on its consequences? Like, there can be many iterations for that answer, for that question. So we should all be skeptical about our moral intuitions and assumptions, even when they appear pretty natural or normal. Because the fact is, moral intuitions differ a lot across cultures and time periods. And it could turn out that the things people find normal today may become unacceptable in the future. And this is why we should be aware of ways that our cognitive processes are flawed. So we should be aware of our biases. So when we talk about biases, we commonly think in terms of like the nefarious ones, such as racism or sexism. And these are very important, and it's important that EAs also talk about these. But today I want to focus on the kinds of biases that are less discussed. So these are the cognitive biases. The picture here shows some of which that we know. And these cognitive biases are actually mental shortcuts that impact our decision making. Because we humans have developed these shortcuts as a way to reach decisions or construct conclusions faster with limited information or without exhausting too much of our attentional resources, because that too is a resource. And why is this relevant to EA? Well, in EA, we want to minimize the risk that we get a crucial consideration wrong, because we do a lot of thinking for the sake of getting things right here. So it's best to make sure that our thinking isn't compromised by biases, and no one is immune to them. That's the truth. But recognizing that they exist can help us think around them. So I want you guys to return to your breakout rooms and then have this cognitive bias exercise. So you will be given the link to the participant workbook, and then each of you in the room will choose one cognitive bias, and then you will discuss to the rest of the group how it might be relevant to your personal life or doing good. So was that clear? Was that clear? Give me a thumbs up if that was clear. All right. So Pia, maybe
Yes.
okay, got it.
Got you. We'll open the rooms right now. Good luck, everyone.
Have fun.
Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope you have. I hope you found the first breakout session fruitful. So before we move on to the next talk, we will do a sharing activity. So may I call or may one group volunteer to share what they found out during the discussion? Are there any volunteers? Oh, Hannah is G. Really? Anyone?
Hello, sige, I can go.
Okay. Who is it?
Jose from
Oh,
Group 4.
okay, go.
Inalay ako ni Gears. So, what?
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
so we talked about how people are just biologically and psychologically inclined to a bias, and how a lot of these biases can affect our judgment. So, especially like what si Rika said na parang these will affect how we think certain solutions might work. We think that they might be better off than they are actually are. So yung biases na pinili naming tatlo would be the planning fallacy. We think na we have enough time, or we underestimate the task at hand. Sunk cost fallacy na parang we want to finish it because we already started on it. And for me personally was declinism, because if you really look at, I don't know, the data we have now on many different problems, it's not looking good. Yun lang naman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jose. Yeah, it's good that you know that the biases can affect our judgment a lot, and yes, and it's good that we are aware of these biases so that we can prepare and adapt to it. And can another group share? Okay, Carl said that Hannah is super G daw, so Hannah,
Okay, hello.
hello.
Okay, so I was with Carl, Faith, and Glezel, and the three biases that we all focused on was diffusion of responsibility, planning fallacy, and sunk cost fallacy. So the three of us, when we discussed, we noticed that we all shared struggle in trying to recognize what is beneficial for us, because we usually get distracted, say, by the things that we're doing, like class or whatever we're doing, or we get distracted by an org that we love too much to leave. But eventually, we overcome the fallacy when we realize that we have to make a decision to benefit ourselves. Yep.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. One last group. Anyone, guys? See Darren.
Okay, hello.
Hello.
Okay. Ay, sorry. So pagbilisan ko na lang 'no. Ang napag-usapan namin, mga anim actually na bias na pag-usapan namin. So basically, yun nga, tulad nga ng sinabi ng iba, mahalagang nakikita natin, nare-recognize natin yung mga bias na 'to para mas makita natin ng maayos kung ano bang gusto nating gawin. Yes. Tapos, siguro, yung ibang examples lang, no? Meron tayong normalcy bias nga rin na kinonek nung isa naming kasama sa COVID, sa pag-announce ng COVID cases recently, no? Parang wala na lang daw. Parang normalized na nga raw. Then, meron din yung planning fallacy, no? Na sali lang tayo ng sali sa mga, parang hype tayong sumali sa mga bagay-bagay at mga org dahil masaya pa tayo ngayon without thinking na mahihirapan tayo in the future pag nagsama-sama na lahat yun. So basically yun lang naman yung mga bias na napag-usapan. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Darren.
Thank you. Thank you.
So talaga nga nakakapagpapagabag ka na itong mga biases na ito talagang nangyayari to everywhere. At yeah, at ito rin yung parang nagpapagrabe na talaga kailangan natin malaman itong mga biases na to upang talagang maging prepared sa mga ganito. Dahil nga malaking apekto kapag may mga biases na nakaka-apekto sa ating judgment at sa pagpaplano rin ng mga bagay-bagay. So, thank you for the sharing. Thank you, Hannah, Jose, and Darren. So for our next talk about cost prioritization, our speaker is the current president of EA Blue. She is currently majoring in BS Health Sci in Ateneo de Manila University and will lead our second session for today. So please welcome Christine Angeles.
Yeah. Hi, guys. Thanks so much,
Hello.
Meta. Cool. So yeah, I will be talking about cost prioritization. I just want to make sure that I'm sharing the right thing. So you see the slides, right? It says session 2, cost prioritization. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I'll try to stay on time. So I will go ahead and start. So this is the outline of what I'll be talking about. You might remember that one of EA's underlying assumptions was that our resources are limited, so we should prioritize how and hence where we use them. So in this session, we're going to present a framework for cause selection, as well as ways of thinking in cause selection that might be helpful in navigating the countless different causes out there. So we'll start with the 3-factor framework. In EA tends to ask 3 questions about each potential focus area. So first, scale. What is the scale of the problem in this area? If all problems in the area could be solved, how much better would the world be? Or how many beings does this problem affect? And to what extent are these beings affected? And second, solvability or tractability. EA asks, how solvable or tractable is the problem in this area? If we doubled the resources dedicated to solving this problem, what fraction of the problem would we expect to solve? And third, neglectedness. How neglected is the area? How many resources are already going towards solving this problem? So accurately estimating scores for these 3 factors is difficult since there's often uncertainty about them. But they're crucial in thinking about what causes we can work on. So other factors for career considerations are personal fit and comparative advantage. So personal fit, you might find a cause that fits all 3 of the factors that were just mentioned, but you might be so disinterested in them and in it. So probably you wouldn't be able to make a huge an impact in this cause. That's one consideration. Another one's comparative advantage. So most of you are probably familiar already with this, but take, for instance, if you have a group of people who are relatively bad at speaking to other people, but then one of them is, better at speaking to other people than everyone in that group, for example. So if you're looking for a spokesperson from that group, you would take that person who's better than the rest, even if they aren't really great at speaking. I guess that's just an example. So it's important to think about these factors. Of course, it's definitely important to always consider first these 3 factors and how these come into play in choosing causes to work on. So to do the most good, we don't want to restrict ourselves to a specific cause area or only to actions that we could rigorously study. So people in EA tend to look for actions that exist on a scale. So there are a range of interventions. So here in the screen, we have 2 interventions that EA could consider supporting. At one end, there's one that could be very cost effective, with strong evidence of their impact, such as insecticide-treated bed nets, for example. And on the other end, there are actions that we don't know for sure will help, but if they do help, could be extraordinarily cost-effective, such as advocating for policy changes that could improve the lives of many at a relatively low cost. So we look into these things, and one concept that's talked about a lot at EA that we could apply this in is expected value. So some of you may be familiar with this. When it comes to choosing interventions, selecting projects, or generally making decisions, we could use this concept, expected value. So expected value is the sum of the value of each potential outcome multiplied by the probability of that outcome occurring. So essentially, it's when you multiply the value by the chance that you will get that value. And we've been making and talking a lot about choices like earlier. So you could take this concept into play in interventions or in situations. So just a quick short exercise. There are two options on the screen here. The first one, would you rather get 500 pesos for sure versus 50% chance of a 50% chance of getting 2,000 pesos? So yeah, I guess you could just chat what your answer would be. I see some B's, some A's. Yeah, I guess I want to ask one person who said B to explain like why you take this chance, this 50% chance. Can I ask Angelica? Just a quick explanation.
Hello. I choose B because I guess similar to investment na when you have higher risk, you have higher returns.
Yeah. Thanks for that. So yeah, I guess that's a great way of a great answer. So in expected value, we could use this way of thinking also in a range of interventions, or in live. So you can be applying this exact same logic as the first question, like what Aika mentioned. So option C, save 100 lives for sure, versus D, a 50% chance of saving 400 lives. So you don't have to answer this, but if we follow this way of thinking, you'd say that okay, maybe you'd want to save like 200 lives, take option D rather than option C. Though just as a caveat, some people have different moral intuitions about this, especially the second question, since you might be really risk averse, for example, and real life interventions are way harder to measure and compare than the options in the first situation and here. Nonetheless, the concept of expected value can still be a very valuable tool in decision making. So this is why it comes up a lot in EA. So you might see, for example, nonprofits with a small chance of having a huge impact, or others where we're pretty sure this could work but might have less impact. So that's just one way of thinking. Another way of thinking is marginal returns, or marginal thinking, or diminishing returns, another economic concept. So if you've taken calculus, this is essentially the rate of change that matters. And if you look at the graph on the screen, you see the amount of effort put into something and the impact it causes. So usually the sweet spot, or what you're looking for, is the high slope area where not a lot of additional effort put into a problem could have a huge impact. So eventually you could get to the point where you could have a lesser slope where each additional effort put in does not create as much impact. And this is ideally not where we'd want to focus, because you'd have to have a lot of effort for high impact. So this is why neglectedness is a thing. If there's an intervention that no one's really done, or a new cause, there's probably a lot of low-hanging fruit, right? So things that don't cost much money but have a lot of impact. Whereas with interventions or cause areas, or areas where a lot of people have been working on for a long time, probably have already plucked all the low-hanging fruit, right? So yeah. I'll just try to quickly go over this example in interest of time. So I'll just get my spotlight over here. So, okay. Yeah, and this way of thinking of the value of the next dollar, kind of like from what Rico was talking about earlier, in the left, so just like as a caveat, that these aren't real numbers. This is just an example. So the left side, you'd see here these dotted lines, and the dotted lines represent how much money, for example, that the world is currently spending on these issues, and the colored bars represent how much, ideally there should be. So for example, with reduced risk from engineered pandemics, there is this much, for example, being put into it, and this much that it, could need. So whereas, for example, the movie industry has a lot of already being put into it, and if you look here at the right, you'd be able to see like how valuable is marginal spending. So because there's really less money being put, for example, and reduced risk from engineered pandemics, it could really have that big bang for your buck, but it could be very important and could be high impact. So that's one way of thinking. And another way of thinking when looking at causes is counterfactual thinking. So counterfactual thinking or reasoning is asking what would have happened if, like the example that Rika brought up earlier with scared straight, you could think about what would have happened if scared straight wasn't done, like what would have been the baseline. And you think, what would be happening if I did not do this anyway, right? So you could think about bringing this forward in time where you're like, okay, this is a future in which you did not do this thing, or this is the future where you did do this thing. So, and Rika also talked about opportunity cost earlier, being able to think about how you're not just, when you choose something, you're not just choosing the value of that, but you're definitely choosing of not giving that value somewhere else, right? So that comes into play when you're choosing charities or time. Like I could be working on something right now, but I mean, I mean, in general, you could be choosing to donate to one charity, for example, and choosing to donate to that charity is not donating on the other charity. So yeah, and the idea of replaceability is also there. So you might have reason to believe if you don't do something, someone else would. But it's important to always never jump into conclusions. So for example, if you think, okay, maybe I'd be less replaceable here, or I'd be more replaceable here, it's important not to jump into conclusions where you work on, especially because replaceability within the EA community might be less than assumed. So for example, working in nonprofits might be more high impact than you'd think for yourself, but that's just a way of thinking. So yeah, now I'll go over an analogy that's typically talked about in EA that's called the drowning child. So is anyone familiar with this analogy? If you are, you could heart thumbs up. Yeah, okay. So I see some people are familiar. I'll just quickly go over it. Also, so this analogy was brought up by Peter Singer, who's a moral philosopher, a key figure in the EA movement, and the author and founder of an organization and a book called The Life You Can Save. So in this analogy, he asks us to consider the ethics of what we owe to people in need. So imagine you're going about a regular route and go past a shallow pond. One morning you notice a child fell in and appears to be drowning. So to wade in and pull the child out would be easy, but it would mean that you get your clothes wet and muddy, and by the time you go home and change, you would have missed your first class. So Peter Singer asks questions like, is there an obligation to rescue the child? Does it make a difference that there are other people walking past the pond who would equally be able to rescue the child but are not doing so? Would it make any difference if the child were far away, for example, in another country, but similarly in danger of death and equally within your means to save at no great cost and no danger to yourself? So Singer aims to show through this analogy that it makes no moral difference whether the person you could help or I can help is a neighbor's child 10 yards from me, or a Bengali whose name I shall never know 10,000 miles away. So yeah, I went over ways of thinking and cause prioritization. Now I'll go over some of the causes that EA looks at based on these ways of thinking. So first, global health and development. So this is a cause area, and it's talked about a lot EA because it causes global poverty and negative health cause a great deal of suffering for a huge number of people. So for example, in 2013, nearly 800 million people were living under the international poverty line. And this has a huge negative impact on health. Each year, millions of these people die from preventable diseases like malaria, tuberculosis, and diarrhea. So another factor is that there are well-evidenced ways of reducing poverty or health problems. So that's the idea of tractability. But even if this suffering is easily preventable, it's nevertheless still somewhat neglected. So as an example, in 2017, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, their assistance committee spent on average just 0.31% of their gross national income on foreign aid, for example. So additional resources could still do a great deal more in this area. And this is just a sample of significant global health development. So if you look here, you can see that the rates of death from measles, malaria, and diarrheal diseases from 1930 to 2019 are down by over 70%. And in 1980, we eradicated smallpox, which is one of the most terrifying diseases on the planet. So it's a terrible disease where people infected would be badly disfigured, and about 30% people would die. And it's estimated that if we achieved like world peace in the same time period, you probably would have saved like 12 million with world peace. But smallpox is estimated to have saved about 60 to 120 million lives at that time period. So it just shows how big of a success story smallpox is, saving like 5 times as many lives as a world peace would have done at that time period. And it just shows how, how big global health and development could be. So another cause area is the case for non-human animals and animal welfare. So there are compelling reasons why we could value non-human lives as we do humans. And there's definitely a lot of moral and empirical uncertainty, such as, you ask what interests of humans and non-humans should count as equal, what apart from sentience should be counted morally, what beings are actually sentient, like how sentient, how does sentience scale with neuron count or brain size. So these are certain uncertainties, but there are no strong reasons to value non-humans drastically less than humans. So if you try to apply the idea of expected value here, you could say that there's a huge number of individuals. So for example, if you would say that I'm 1% certain that there's a chance that animals are morally relevant, if you multiply that by like the factor over here, 60 billion, that's a pretty big expected value calculation. So even when you're being uncertain, this could still be catastrophically bad, right? So yeah, it's this is why we see a lot of charities trying to combat these, and in EA and or companies trying to minimize the need for factory farmed animals, which does not only benefit animals but also the climate. So this is an important issue that's very neglected and is in the sphere of EA. So I'll just go over this quickly in the interest of time because I mentioned already the case for non-human animals, but the idea of factory farming, the number of animals living and suffering in factory farms are also large in scale. About 50 billion animals are raised and slaughtered in factory farms around the world each year, and relatively small improvements to their treatment could still substantially improve their welfare. And here on this on the screen, you could see that there are 3,000 times more animals in factory farms than there are stray pets in animal shelters, yet a tiny minority of philanthropic funding goes towards factory farms. So the data that I'm sharing, though, is probably outdated. So this is from 2018 from a talk by Will McCaskill, Oxford professor. So since then, EA-inspired donors have given over 40 million to the farmed animal space last year. But if we put this up to 60 million, we're still nowhere close to the 1.2 billion given to shelters. So I guess that's just a showcase of, yeah. Okay, so next, the long-term future and long-termism. So this might be less intuitive to some of us. It was for me. But the goal is not to convince you right away, but to explain the reasons behind this and the rational and sympathetic reasons towards working towards improving the long-term future. So when judging the value of an action, future considerations may be highly relevant. Ethical theories according to which future people are moral patients, that being their well-being is of comparable importance to the well-being of people at present, imply that we ought to consider the long-term future of humanity rather than just the next 100 years or so. In fact, since it's impossible that nearly everyone who will ever live has not yet been born, these ethical theories tend to imply that if there is anything that can be done to positively shape the long-term future, this could be significantly valuable. And there's a caveat that, working towards improving the long-term future is not necessarily mutually exclusive with working towards improving short-term causes. For example, when you work to improve climate change, that could be helping the long-term future, but also have a significant tangible impacts today, right? So yeah, just to go into this a little bit more, to explain some threats to the long-term future. So if you look at the picture here, this is taken from a book about long-termism called The Precipice, and it looks into existential risks and long-termism. So an existential catastrophe could mean extinction or unrecoverable collapse or unrecoverable dystopia. And existential risks could contribute to these with the potential to eliminate all of humanity or damage human well-being on a global scale, even endangering or destroying modern civilization. So until I'll, oops, here are examples of existential risks. So until relatively recently, most existential risks were considered or were just natural, like what you see on the left: super volcanoes, asteroid impacts that led to mass extinctions millions of years ago. But the technological advances of the last century, while responsible for great progress and achievements, have also opened up to new existential risks. So take, for instance, nuclear war, the first man-made global catastrophic risk, as a global war could kill a huge percentage of the human population, right? But as more research was put into this, in fact, scientists realized that the resulting nuclear winter after nuclear war could even be more deadly than the war itself, potentially killing most people on Earth. So I guess that's just an example. Another thing, climate change. It's a growing concern that people and governments around the world are trying to address. As the global average temperature rises, droughts, floods, extreme storms, and more could become the norm. And while climate change might itself not be considered, might not be a direct existential risk, possibly, the havoc it wreaks could increase the likelihood of things like nuclear war, pandemics, or other catastrophes, for example. And emerging technologies. So one is dystopian scenarios or oppressive political systems. For example, if you've read 1984 or A Brave New World, these show how totalitarian regimes could be, potentially very harmful. While they might not wipe out civilization, they could lead to an indefinite period of enormous suffering if they use advanced technologies or surveillance systems to control populations with no chance of overthrowing them. So that's something like we wouldn't think about initially, but that's also still potentially very harmful. And also there's the idea, there's biotechnology and artificial intelligence. So biotechnology and genetics, they inspire as much fear as an excitement. People worry about the negative effects of them. And while they provide incredible opportunity to save and improve lives, they also increase existential risks associated with, for instance, manufactured pandemics and loss of genetic diversity, for example. And then there's artificial intelligence, or AI, which has long been associated with science fiction, but it's a field that has already made significant strides in recent years and could be exponentially taking bigger strides. So as with biotechnology, there's a great opportunity to improve lives with AI. But if the technology is not developed safely, there's also the chance that someone could accidentally or intentionally even unleash an AI system that ultimately causes the elimination of humanity. So yeah, I'm near the end. So here is expanding our moral circle. So earlier Rika talked about uncertainty. And I think this concept is very important when we think about how we want to help others and can come into play when expanding or when we try to expand our moral circle. So the circle is the imaginary boundary we draw around those we consider worthy of moral consideration. And when we look back at history, we are disturbed by populations that are outside the general moral circle of concern. For example, to many slave owners, Africans weren't beings of moral worth, or to men, women, or even different sexualities and genders. So thankfully, our moral circle has expanded, and a lot of the world generally agrees with this expansion. However, there are still, there's still problems, and the causes we looked at just now, such as distant strangers, non-human animals, and future generations, could to some people feel not as important because these populations aren't fully in their moral circle. So in EA, EA aims to expand the moral circle to include more and more populations. And we have to note that in reality, progress is nonlinear and imperfect. So it's important we practice uncertainty in our moral circle and not consider that there's a defined definition for morality. So lastly, some other cause areas. What I mentioned, those aren't just the cause areas of EA. It's not just limited to that. There's also mental health, electoral reform, building the EA community, global priorities research, which is about rigorously investigating what the most important global problems are, how we would compare them to each other, and what kinds of interventions best address them. So, for example, how do we compare the value of more work on climate change versus global health versus preventing future pandemics? And there might be even a cause X that we have not discovered yet or not thinking about yet. So, yeah, that's it for this cause prioritization talk. We will go back to our breakout rooms and have an exercise. So in our breakout rooms, there's a cause list in the workbook, and each person, you'd be able to pick one that you think you'd want 10 more people globally to work on, explain why, and answer what do each of you think about the others' explanations for their causes. Where do you agree or disagree? And could one or more of you try arguing for a different cause, for why a different cause should be prioritized than the one you selected? So what facts, if true, do you think would make that cause more important to prioritize? So yeah, I think that would be pretty exciting. But that's all. Thank you.
Once again, we will have another sharing. Can I call two groups to share what they talk about within their breakout groups? So yes, Fasis, offer up your tributes.
Go Joaquin!
Joaquin.
Hello.
Hello.
Can people hear me po?
Yep.
Okay. So, essentially, for our group, which is formed by yung group namin ni Elmer, is that we pick as our three causes risks from AI, biosecurity, and climate change, which are arguably very important things to work on. And for AI, we just talked about how progress is rapidly advancing on that front without people slowing down to think about whether this is something that we should really try to push through forward, and how we should really take our time to invest as much in AI security as in with the same level of kind of rigor in AI advancement. And with regards to biosecurity, we also talked about how we're living in essentially a real life example of a failure in biosecurity policy, just COVID, and how genetic engineering can increase inequality in the future, and how we should really take the steps rin to invest as much in biosecurity, because it will impact other fields of life. And for climate change, of course, we are living in a world we're just essentially getting hotter and hotter, and this is not a alarm bells have been sounded with regards to climate change then, and we should really take our steps in order to drastically reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and how we should really conduct ourselves in our daily lives in order to create an essentially lesser carbon footprint and whatever. So, ayun lang po.
Thank you, Joaquin. Yeah, it's good that you picked those three causes, because these causes focus more on prevention, and what it's easier to stop problems than correct them later. Then next, may I call on Faith, if it's okay? Okay.
Hi!
Hello.
Okay, so yung napag-usapan ng group namin is between health and development, climate change, and AI. Pero ang pinag-usapan namin first sa health and development is that health can be more empowering, and we still need to work on it kahit na ba ang dami na nating resources na binato doon Tapos domino effect lahat ng ginagawa natin sa health and development. Tapos sample demonstrations regarding health and development is yun nga sa African countries, yung diseases nila, baka kailangan lang natin i-educate yung mga tao doon para bawasan yung number ng illnesses sa kanila kasi baka kaya sila nagkakasakit kasi hindi lang sila well educated about the matter. Tapos yung sa Pilipinas naman, education pa rin talaga kasi for example, yung kapag sa ospital, pag tinanong mo yung tao if may diabetes ba sila, ang isasagot nila wala. Pero pag tinanong mo na, sir or ma'am, may diabetes po ba kayo? Sasagot nila, meron. So kumbaga, hindi sila well informed about that kasi nga hindi naman masyadong binibigyan ng focus yung healthcare sector dito sa Pilipinas kahit na kahit na ang daming nurses na gagaling sa Pilipinas na pupunta sa ibang lugar. Tapos with regards sa climate change, we believe na it affects vulnerable people and affects their capacity to attend to their other needs. With AI naman, hindi pa siya masyadong natatakil sa atin. Tapos highly neglected siya and pandemic accelerated. Pero in conclusion, we believe na kahit saan angle tumingin, may angle of vulnerability pa rin na nananalaytay. Yes, Tagalog time. Thank you.
Thank you, Faith. Sige, thank you, Coquine and Faith for the sharing. And we can move on to for our last session. We will have a short talk about putting EA into action with Rika Gabriel.
Okay, hello again, guys. So I'm going to be talking about how to put EA into practice because having learned some EA concepts this afternoon, I bet you're wondering how can this be practical for every day, you know? And one concrete way to practice EA is by donating to effective charities. So GiveWell makes that process so much easier because they are dedicated to finding outstanding giving opportunities in the global health and development sector, publishing full details of their analyses, and then recommending high impact giving opportunities. So some of the charities, there you go. Some of the top charities that GiveWell recommends focus on these interventions. So first is providing unconditional cash transfers to extremely impoverished areas and distributing medicine and nets to prevent malaria and providing cash incentives for routine childhood vaccines and providing supplements to prevent vitamin A deficiency and also treatments for parasitic worm infections. And I don't know, it just shows that you don't need a lot of money to do good in these areas. And although it may not be as as fancy as the other interventions that people usually donate to, these are proven to be cost-effective solutions. And now, if you find yourself compelled to donate to effective charities, you can actually join the Giving What We Can community, which is a community of effective givers who pledge to donate 10% of their income, or if they're still not working, 1% of their spending money to whichever organizations can best use it to improve the lives of others. So you can visit this website, givingwhatwecan.org, if you're interested in this. And other than donations, your career can also do a lot of good. So, estimatedly, we have 80,000 hours that we invest in our career. So, it's a good idea to think hard about how we can best use this time to help solve the world's most pressing problems. So, thankfully, there's this organization that's EA aligned called 80,000 Hours that provides research and support to help people switch into careers that do this effectively. And personally, having read the career guide of 80,000 hours, it really impacted the cause area I choose to prioritize today. My personal advocacy it even motivated my shift to a different course. And I'm not saying that you guys should shift, but it is good to use the time we have right now, most especially since most of us here are university students, to discern what career path we want to pursue. And yeah, another way is to engage with the global EA community. So you can join EA Facebook groups for updates and events, and then also check out the EA forum. So here is the link. And in the EA forum, you can read more about effective altruism and also post some of your answers or questions too for the EA community to address. And another way is to attend EA Global conferences. So you can visit their website. So it's eaglobal.org. And you can see their upcoming events. So two of which are the EA Global Reconnect 2021 and the EA Fellowship Weekend. So if you visit the link, you can see more information on these two events. And another way is to engage with EA Blue. So you can follow our Facebook page for more updates and attend our events. So we actually have two upcoming events. So the first one is the productivity workshop, which will be happening on March 6, 2020. And I hope Pia can send the link to the registration form for this event in the chat. And another one would be the EA Blue Virtual Fellowship. So officially, registration for this event is closed, but we are opening it again exclusively for those who attended the EAC. So what is the EA Blue Virtual Fellowship? Well, it is a 10-week program patterned after other similar fellowships in Oxford University and Stanford University that that aims to delve deeper into effective altruism concepts, talking about global issues such as existential risks, global health and development, animal welfare. And yeah, I hope you guys take this chance to apply. And that's it. So I know we've talked about a lot of concepts this afternoon, and maybe some of you guys are overwhelmed or gutom, maybe. But really, this talk has barely scratched the surface of the content of effective altruist ideas. So Chris and I tried to present to you with the core ideas, but there's just so much more learning to do, even on our part. And at the heart of EA is a community that wants to help each other, help others better. And I hope that you guys take on this chance and that we see you, or most of you guys, in our future events as we try to build this movement locally. So thank you, everyone, and back to you, Bedo.
Thank you, Rika. So yes, have you all enjoyed the event so far, guys? Yes. Thank you, Angelica. I see some heart reactions. Yep. Yes. Yes. All right. Nice one, guys. Yeah. Thank you for the responses. So before we close this event, I hope you could take the time to answer the feedback form. Yeah, it's in the slides. There's the link, the bit.ly. And this feedback form will inform us of what you enjoyed from this workshop and how can we improve our next events. And the link has been sent to our Zoom chat. And yeah, as a last request, I hope you can open your cameras so we can take a quick picture together, please.
Hard to explain
Oh,
and to
the dog.
express.
Okay, I can take a picture.
Just a work in progress.
Again. We'll wait for a few
Feeling happy,
more.
feeling sad.
Okay, so there are 2 pages, so just continue swiping. 1, 2,
Can't hold a
3.
pencil or a thought.
Okay, one more.
Can't feed
Uy, may
myself
dog.
something I'm not.
1,
Oh,
2,
feeling every day the same. Oh, oh, up and down on every frame.
Hey guys,
Oh,
thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for coming. Yay! I hope you guys enjoyed. Don't forget to
Bye,
answer the feedback
everyone.
form.
Hi.
Tell you how I feel when nothing seems real. It's all just cartoons in my head. And everything's unseen, like the fastest in between. It's all just cartoons